The Xerath had taken the Doris world by storm. They were relentless, their massive hunter ships looming over the planet like predatory vultures. The Xerath Empire, known throughout the galaxy as the undisputed apex of strength, had crushed every civilization in their path. Entire species had fallen, their worlds pillaged and left barren, their people enslaved or exterminated. The Doris had hoped for a miracle, but now it seemed like their time had come. The Xerath didn't just conquer, they hunted. The Xerath battle fleet, a terrifying force of towering warships, each the size of a small moon, now surrounded the Doris homeworld. Their sleek, silver ships had an eerie beauty to them, but they were built for one purpose: to hunt down prey with terrifying efficiency. They came from a species that valued strength above all else, a race of predators who viewed the weak as nothing more than resources to be harvested. From their flagship, Askar, the Xerath Supreme Commander, surveyed the planet. His piercing red eyes glinted with satisfaction as he watched the Doris cities burn from orbit. The Xerath had arrived with an overwhelming force, expecting the Doris to cower and submit as every other species had. But the Doris didn't bow easily, even in the face of annihilation. They'd fought, not with overwhelming force, but with an ingenuity that had kept them alive far longer than any other species under Xerath's rule. Still, it was no match for the might of the Xerath fleet. Askar's voice rumbled through the comms, his tone dripping with cruel amusement. "Their resistance is a futile display of desperation," he said, addressing his officers. "Let them burn. The galaxy will know we have come for the Doris. The galaxy will know we are unstoppable." For the Xerath, it was only a matter of time before the last remnants of the Doris resistance were crushed under the weight of their superiority. Askar's mind was already turning to their next conquest. The galaxy was vast, and many more species stood ripe for the taking. Humanity, or whatever insignificant life form existed in the distant reaches of the galaxy, was of no concern to him. His empire's reach had no equal. Nothing could stop them, not even the whispers of some distant human civilization. But then, a strange signal appeared on the Xerath's long-range scanners, something unexpected. The Doris defenses flickered and pulsed with an unfamiliar energy. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a challenge. The transmission was brief but clear. "You are not the hunters anymore." Askar paused. The words were meaningless at first. Who dared to speak to him like this? He was about to dismiss the message when something about the transmission caught his attention. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It wasn't the sound of a dying world. Instead, there was defiance, an unexpected spark of resistance. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath. The words echoed in his mind. The Xerath had never encountered such boldness, not from a species they considered inferior. The only thing that could break the monotony of their centuries of conquest was the sudden hint of a threat, a challenge they didn't understand. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Askar felt an unfamiliar feeling creeping into his chest. Doubt. He shook it off, focusing his mind. Send the fleet to the coordinates. Burn their world to ash. No one dares challenge the Xerath. The order was given, but the seed of uncertainty had been planted. Unbeknownst to Askar, humanity had just made its first mark on the galaxy, and it would echo far beyond the reach of the Xerath's firestorm. The Liberty's fury drifted silently through the dark expanse of space, its hull scared and battered from previous engagements, yet still standing strong. Captain Diana Marshall stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. The planet of the Doris was barely visible now, just another speck of light among a sea of stars. But the weight of the mission pressed on her shoulders. It wasn't just about saving a single world anymore. It was about sending a message. As the Xerath fleet tightened its grip around the Doris, their deadly hunter ships launched a final wave of destruction. The destruction of entire cities was imminent, yet it was at that very moment, when the Doris seemed on the brink of annihilation, that humanity made its unexpected mark. The transmission had cut through the void. the words from the human warship now ringing in the ears of the Xerath commanders. "You are not the hunters anymore." Askar scoffed at the transmission, dismissing it as a desperate plea. But his officers had never seen anything like it. The signal had come from a warship they could not identify, a ship smaller than the Xerath's largest vessels. Yet its speed, its agility, everything about it was a mystery. "We'll crush them like we've crushed everything else." Askar had growled, his eyes narrowing as he ordered the fleet to engage. What the Xerath didn't know was that the Liberty's Fury wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of human tenacity. This was no normal spacefaring vessel. It was a specially designed warship, built with human ingenuity and resilience at its core. While the Xerath reveled in their might, humanity had perfected the art of survival through adaptation. "Enemy fleet on approach," reported Commander Jason Turner, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "They're launching their assault." "Prepare for battle," Captain Marshall replied, her tone calm yet filled with determination. "I don't plan on being the first to fall." As the Xerath closed in, the Liberty's Fury flickered to life, its engines roaring as it dove into the incoming firestorm. The Xerath fleet, expecting an easy victory, immediately opened fire with everything they had. Massive plasma bolts and laser blasts rained down, but the Liberty's Fury darted between them like a predator evading a trap. "Their tracking systems can't lock on," Lieutenant Sarah Voss said with a grin. "We're too fast for them." Marshall didn't need to look back at her crew to know that they were performing flawlessly. The ship's design, based on human ingenuity, was unlike anything that Xerath had encountered. It was smaller, faster, and more maneuverable, able to weave through firestorms and around asteroid fields with ease. The ship was built for precision strikes, not direct confrontation, and that's what made it deadly. The Xerath fired relentlessly, but they couldn't land a hit. The Liberty's Fury used every evasive maneuver in the book, and the Xerath fleet's pride began to unravel. The first blow was swift, a direct hit to a Xerath destroyer's power core, which exploded in a brilliant burst of light. Askar's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are they?" he growled. "How are they evading us?" Captain Marshall's voice crackled over the comm. "This is humanity. You've underestimated us for far too long." With surgical precision, the Liberty's Fury disabled a second ship, an advanced Xerath cruiser, by targeting its communication relays and propulsion systems. As the Xerath vessel drifted helplessly in space, the humans didn't relent. Every strike was calculated, every movement deliberate. The Liberty's Fury was a small but potent force, and with each passing moment, the Xerath began to realize that they were not facing an easy conquest. The Xerath fleet, once confident in their superiority, was now faltering. The Liberty's Fury had disrupted their momentum, their once unquestioned dominance slipping away. "Commence the next phase," Marshall ordered. "Let's see how they handle a fight on our terms." And with that, the Liberty's Fury plunged deeper into the heart of the Xerath fleet, its engines firing again as it disappeared into the chaos, ready to turn the tide of battle forever. The Liberty's Fury had delivered its first blow to the Xerath fleet, but the true test was just beginning. The Xerath had retreated, their ships scattered, wounded but not broken. Askar's pride, though bruised, remained unshaken. He would not let this small band of humans interfere with the Xerath Empire's grand design. He would make an example of them. On the Xerath flagship, the tension was palpable. Askar paced before his command staff, his clawed hands gripping the edges of his chair as he stared out at the holographic displays of the battlefield. "They will learn," he muttered, his voice low and menacing. "I'll break them." He turned to his second-in-command, Vokkar, a battle-hardened Xerath general whose eyes burned with the same fiery ambition that had fueled the Xerath's conquest of the galaxy. "Prepare the fleet. We will hunt them down like the prey they are. They think they can evade us. Let them try." The Xerath fleet quickly regrouped, their ships forming a precise, terrifying formation, each ship within range of the others, their weapons systems primed. The humans, however, were still out there somewhere. The Xerath were not concerned with anything other than their prey's capture. The galaxy had learned long ago that once the Xerath set their sights on a target, no one escaped. Meanwhile, the Liberty's Fury drifted in the void, its hull battered but still intact. Captain Marshall stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes scanning the array of data flashing across the screens. The human crew had pulled off something incredible, but now they were in uncharted territory. The Xerath fleet would regroup. The humans had little time to celebrate their victory before the next assault came. The Liberty's Fury was fast, but it was also severely outgunned. The Xerath were relentless. Marshall knew they couldn't evade them forever. "We can't keep running," Marshall said, her voice steady, but there was an edge of determination in it. "We'll have to make our stand." The crew fell silent. The reality of what she was saying sunk in. The Xerath were too powerful, too numerous. The humans had no chance of matching their sheer force in open battle. But that was never the plan. It was time to turn the tables. "Set a course for the asteroid field," Marshall ordered. "We'll lure them in. If they want to fight, we'll give it to them, but on our terms." Lieutenant Turner, the weapons officer, nodded. "I'll prep the torpedoes. If they come in close, we'll show them what we've got." Marshall clenched her fist, her gaze hardening. She knew the risks. Leading the Xerath into a trap could cost them everything. But she also knew one thing for certain. Humanity wasn't going to die quietly. If they were going down, it was going to be with a fight that would be remembered for eons. The Liberty's Fury set course for a dense asteroid field on the edge of the system. As they approached, Marshall's heart pounded. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. They needed to use the terrain, the asteroids themselves, as weapons. They would be the bait, and the Xerath would be the ones to fall into the trap. Back on the Xerath flagship, Azkar's eyes narrowed as his fleet's sensors picked up the human vessel's course. "They're trying to run," he sneered. "Let them think they're escaping. We will be their hunters once more." As the Xerath fleet closed in on the asteroid field, a massive, bone-chilling silence fell across the ship. Azkar knew this would be his moment. They would strike swiftly and decisively, ending the human threat before it could grow any more dangerous. But the humans had something different in mind. This time, they're the prey. Marshall muttered under her breath as she prepared for the next phase of the battle. The chase had only just begun, and the Xerath were in for a lesson they would never forget. The Liberty's Fury lurked at the edge of the asteroid field, its silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of tumbling rocks and debris. The Xerath fleet was coming, the massive hunter ships growing ever closer, their weapons primed for the kill. Captain Diana Marshall stood at the helm, her mind razor-sharp as she reviewed the tactics they'd be forced to rely on in this final stand. "We don't have much time," Marshall said, her voice steady but filled with quiet urgency. "They'll be in range in a few minutes. We need to make every move count." She turned to her crew. "This will be our most dangerous maneuver yet, but it's our only chance. Once we start, there's no turning back." The asteroid field was vast and treacherous, a perfect environment to trap the overconfident Xerath. The human ship would use the jagged rocks and shifting debris as cover, relying on stealth and agility to outmaneuver the larger, slower Xerath warships. But it was a delicate game. One false move, one misstep, and it would be the humans who found themselves caught in a deadly trap. Lieutenant Turner, the ship's weapons officer, adjusted the targeting systems. "We've got enough firepower to take down at least one ship, maybe two, if we're lucky, but we'll need to hit them fast and hard." Marshall nodded. "Luck won't save us. Precision will." As the Xerath fleet approached, the Liberty's Fury powered forward, diving into the asteroid field. The massive warships behind them were slow to react. Their sensor systems were designed to track the largest of targets, not something as nimble as the Liberty's Fury. But the humans knew that staying hidden for long wouldn't be enough. They needed to act fast, to strike when the Encircled least expected it. "There's no turning back now," Captain Marshall whispered to herself as her ship dodged a large asteroid, weaving through the treacherous debris. The Encircled fleet closed in, their massive forms filling the holographic displays. At the helm of his flagship, Azkar sneered, "They think they can hide from us. We are the hunters. No prey escapes." But he was underestimating the humans. The Liberty's fury had already moved into position, using the asteroid field as a natural cloak. They were no longer just running from the Encircled. They were becoming the predators. "Fire on my mark," Marshall ordered. The Encircled fleet, clustered in a formation, continued to press forward. The asteroid field was a maze of massive rocks and smaller fragments, perfect for setting up an ambush. Marshall knew they couldn't avoid every shot, but they didn't need to. The Liberty's Fury's hull was designed to withstand light impacts, and the ship's agility meant they could easily dodge most incoming fire. The Encircled, however, had no such advantage. "Now," Marshall barked, and Lieutenant Turner opened fire. The first shot was a brilliant display of calculated destruction. A single torpedo shot that struck Encircled destroyer's aft section, disabling its engines and sending it spiraling into an asteroid. Sparks flew from the damaged ship as it collided with the rock, breaking into pieces. "Target acquired," Turner shouted. "Another one's in our sights." The Liberty's Fury weaved and dodged, continuously shifting positions. Each shot from the Encircled fleet missed, their firepower ineffective in such a confined, unpredictable environment. The smaller human ship moved like a shadow, too fast and too elusive for the Encircled to track. "They're scattering," Marshall said, her voice tight with focus. "Get ready for the next phase." The Encircled began to panic. They couldn't catch the humans, and every time they thought they had the Liberty's Fury cornered, the humans slipped away, striking with deadly precision before disappearing into the debris. Azkar slammed his fist on the command console in frustration. "It's not possible. We are the apex predators." But the humans were outwitting him, using their small size and speed to tear apart the Encircled's carefully orchestrated attack. The humans' tactics were unpredictable, unlike anything the Encircled had ever encountered. They were the real predators now. "They're not just running," Volker, Azkar's second-in-command, said, watching in disbelief. "They're hunting us." And for the first time since they had entered the Doris system, the Encircled fleet wasn't the one in control. They were the prey. The Liberty's Fury was no longer just evading the Encircled. It was making them fear for their own survival. Captain Marshall's strategy had begun to pay off. With every strike, the Encircled's confidence faltered. The once unassailable fleet was being dismantled piece by piece. However, the battle was far from over. In the depths of space, the asteroid field had become the perfect battleground, a deadly labyrinth where the humans controlled the pace of the fight. But the Encircled weren't stupid. They had encountered clever enemies before, and they had adapted. As the Liberty's Fury darted through the field, Azkar was already hatching his own countermeasure. "They are trying to wear us down," Azkar growled, his eyes narrowing. "We are not prey. It's time to turn the tide in our favor." On the Encircled flagship, Volker stood by his side, studying the holographic display. "Their ship is fast, but it can't sustain this hit-and-run strategy forever. We'll force them into open space and overwhelm them with sheer numbers." Azkar nodded, his confidence returning. "Let them play their game. We will bait them out." The Encircled commander issued orders for his fleet to spread out, covering the entire asteroid field in a broad formation. They would no longer chase the humans directly, but instead, they would force them into the open, into a kill zone. The Encircled were patient predators, and they knew the time would come when the humans would slip, when they would make a mistake. Meanwhile, aboard the Liberty's Fury, the crew was in full motion, executing Marshall's evasive maneuvers with precision. But even the most agile ship couldn't remain hidden forever. The human crew was pushing themselves to the limit, but the strain was starting to show. "Their formation is tightening," Lieutenant Turner reported, his voice tinged with concern. "They're trapping us." Marshall's eyes scanned the redouts. The asteroid field that had given them an advantage was beginning to close in. The Xerath had shifted tactics, and now the Liberty's fury was being funneled toward the heart of the system. The only escape route was through the mass of Xerath ships, who were now ready to pounce. "They're forcing us into open space," Marshall muttered under her breath. "We can't keep running. We'll need to stand and fight." The decision was made. They would use the few seconds of open space to make their final push. There was no room for error, no second chances. If they didn't strike now, they would be overwhelmed. "Set a course for the flagship," Marshall ordered, her voice unwavering. "All power to weapons. We're going in." Turner's fingers flew over the console, activating the ship's powerful weapon systems. "Captain, it's all set. We've got enough firepower to cripple their flagship, but we'll need to get close." The Liberty's fury roared to life, pushing toward the heart of the Xerath fleet with unprecedented speed. The larger ships tried to reorient, but they were too slow. The human ship was a blur, darting between the larger Xerath vessels with lethal precision. Plasma bolts and energy blasts whizzed by, narrowly missing the Liberty's fury, but Marshall's crew was too well trained to panic. As the Liberty's fury neared the flagship, the air on the bridge crackled with tension. Marshall took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the firing controls. "Now," she said softly. A torrent of energy weapons erupted from the ship, striking the Xerath flagship's shields. The flagship rocked as it absorbed the attack, but the human ship wasn't done yet. They had one shot, one chance, to make this count. The Liberty's fury slammed into the heart of the Xerath fleet, weaving and dodging through fire as it prepared to deliver the killing blow. The Xerath flagship's shields flared, but it wasn't enough. The Liberty's fury fired once more, its last torpedo hitting the flagship's power core. The resulting explosion was blinding, sending shockwaves through the Xerath fleet. The flagship groaned, its form buckling as the core collapsed. Askar's eyes widened in disbelief as his flagship began to break apart, a massive explosion lighting up the void of space. For the first time in this long campaign, the Xerath were not the ones controlling the battlefield. They had been caught off guard, and the humans were making their mark on the galaxy. "The tide has shifted," Marshall muttered, watching the destruction unfold on the view screen. "We have them now." The Xerath fleet, reeling from the loss of their flagship, faltered. For the first time in centuries, the mighty predators had been wounded, and the humans were poised to press the advantage. The Xerath flagship crumbled in space, its immense frame torn apart by the explosive power of the Liberty's Fury's torpedoes. Captain Marshall's heart raced, but there was no time for celebration. The explosion was still rippling through the Xerath fleet, sending out waves of debris and shockwaves that scattered the remaining enemy ships. The tide of battle had shifted, but it was far from over. The Xerath were no longer the confident predators. They were scrambling, unsure of their next move. Askar stood on the command deck of his second-in-command's warship, his face twisted in fury. His flagship was gone. The most advanced ship in the Xerath fleet, destroyed in a single strike by a human vessel no larger than a destroyer. This wasn't just a tactical loss. It was an affront to everything the Xerath had stood for. "Regroup the fleet. Now," Askar barked, his voice dripping with venom. "We will not let these vermin think they can defeat us. We will show them the price of their arrogance." Vokher, ever the loyal soldier, stepped forward, his gaze cold and calculating. "They are vulnerable now. Askar, we will hunt them down, crush their ship, and take the humans' leaders as prisoners. They'll break." Askar didn't speak. He simply stared out into the stars. He had underestimated the humans, mistaken their resourcefulness for desperation. But now, the Xerath would show no mercy. They would make an example of the Liberty's fury. Back aboard the human vessel, Marshall took a deep breath. Her crew, though victorious in their strike, knew the enemy was far from defeated. The Liberty's fury was battered, its shields barely functional, and ammunition running low. The Xerath would come at them with everything they had left. This would be their final stand. "Captain, incoming fleet movement," Lieutenant Turner reported. "The Xerath are regrouping, and they're forming up for a full assault." Marshall's fingers hovered over the holographic interface, her mind calculating. "They've lost their flagship, but they still have the strength of their fleet. We can't afford to be outnumbered." She quickly ordered the crew to engage the remaining systems and prepare for the fight. The ship was low on resources, but Marshall knew she had one advantage left: speed. If they could keep moving, stay unpredictable, they might just be able to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. "We need to strike fast and hard," Marshall said, her tone resolute. "Take out their smaller ships first, disable their long-range weapons, and make them chase us into open space." The Liberty's fury surged forward once more, its engines firing up with intensity as it darted between asteroids, launching precision torpedoes at the scattered Xerath vessels. Each shot found its mark, sending smaller Xerath ships spiraling out of control, their engines rupturing or shields flickering into nothingness. The humans had become a force of nature, relentless and unpredictable. Every move was calculated, every shot a warning to the Xerath that humanity would never be cowed. The humans didn't fight like the Xerath, savage and overwhelming. They fought with precision, with purpose. They had no interest in crushing their enemies outright. Instead, they left a trail of destruction behind, knowing that every ship they destroyed weakened the Xerath grip on their empire. "We're taking down their fleet, Captain," Lieutenant Sarah Voss reported, her voice sharp. "But they're regrouping quickly." Marshall nodded, watching as the remaining Xerath ships began to close in. The odds were still stacked against them. The Xerath had more ships, more firepower. But humanity had something the Xerath had never anticipated: resilience. The Liberty's fury entered a high-speed, evasive course, dodging plasma fire and energy beams from the Xerath ships. It darted through an opening between two massive asteroids, narrowly avoiding a barrage of shots. The Xerath were closing in, but Marshall had one final card to play. "Prepare the decoy drones," Marshall ordered. "Let's give them a taste of their own tactics." The crew worked in a flurry, launching a series of small, lightweight decoy drones designed to mimic the Liberty's fury signature. As the drones scattered, the Xerath ships hesitated, firing at the decoys and slowing their advance. It was just enough time. With the fleet divided, the Liberty's fury veered toward a narrow gap in the Xerath ranks, the path forward clear. The humans had proven their ability to survive. Now they had to prove they could win. "We're not done yet," Marshall said, her eyes narrowing in determination. "Let's finish this." The Xerath fleet was in disarray. The EMP pulse had disrupted their systems, leaving them vulnerable and scattered in the vast emptiness of space. The Liberty's fury danced through the chaos, its weapons tearing through the Xerath ranks with relentless precision. The once proud fleet was now a shattered remnant, their ships slow to react, their firepower crippled. Captain Marshall stood at the helm, her fingers steady as she directed the crew through the battle. But despite their victories, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The humans had taken control, but this was no easy triumph. Every shot fired, every move made, was costing them. The Liberty's fury was battered, and the crew was running on fumes. They had fought hard, but they could not afford to underestimate their enemies. "Captain," Lieutenant Turner's voice came through the comms, tense but filled with urgency. "We've got more Xerath reinforcements on the way. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Marshall's eyes flickered to the tactical display. Sure enough, a new wave of Xerath ships was emerging from the distant shadows of the system. Larger, heavily armed vessels, built for just such a situation. If the humans couldn't finish this now, the battle would spiral beyond their control. "We've bought some time," Marshall replied, her voice calm, though the tension in her chest was palpable. "But we need to push faster. We have to take down their command ships now, before the reinforcements arrive." "Captain," said Lieutenant Voss, the comms officer, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're getting an encrypted transmission. It's coming from the Tereth flagship, the one we destroyed earlier." Marshall's brow furrowed. The flagship was gone, obliterated in a fiery explosion. How can that be possible? Voss didn't respond immediately. She worked her controls, decoding the message as fast as she could. When it finally came through, Marshall's heart sank. "It's A's care," Voss said softly. "He's alive. And he's activated a self-destruct sequence. It's set to go off in 5 minutes. Marshall stared at the screen. Azkar, the Tereth commander who had been leading the fleet, had somehow survived the destruction of his flagship. And now he was resorting to a last-ditch effort to annihilate them all. The self-destruct would not only destroy the Liberty's fury, but also cripple the rest of the Xerath fleet in the process. They're using the wreckage of the flagship as a weapon, Marshall realized. The explosion will cause a chain reaction that'll take out everything within 100 kilometers. We need to stop it. Now. Without a second thought, Marshall issued the order. All engines to maximum. We're going after the wreckage. The Liberty's fury roared to life, the engines flaring as it sped toward the floating remains of the Xerath flagship. The wreckage was surrounded by a swarm of smaller Xerath ships, attempting to guard the detonator from any human attack. The remnants of Azkar's fleet, though struggling, were still formidable. We don't have time for subtlety, Marshall said, gripping the armrest of her chair. Prepare a full barrage. We need to clear a path to the self-destruct. The Liberty's fury plunged into the heart of the wreckage, unleashing torrents of energy fire and missiles. Xerath ships exploded in bright bursts, but the path forward was still heavily guarded. The seconds ticked away on the countdown. We're almost there, Turner shouted, his hands flying over the weapons console. A few more seconds. Marshall watched as the clock in her mind counted down along with the one on the screen. The tension in the air was palpable. It was a race against time. Every shot fired felt like it could be their last. The fate of the Liberty's fury and its crew hung in the balance. Now, Marshall barked, and with one final push, the Liberty's fury unleashed its remaining firepower directly at the heart of the wrecked flagship's core. A blinding explosion rocked the battlefield, and for a split second, Marshall thought they had failed. But then, the warning lights on the ship's consoles blinked green. The self-destruct had been neutralized. The immediate threat was over. However, the cost was far greater than they had anticipated. The Liberty's fury was barely operational. The engines sputtered, and the hull groaned under the strain of the battle. But they had won. For now. We did it, Turner said, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and relief. Marshall allowed herself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction, but she knew that their victory came at a price. The humans had proven themselves, but the war was far from over. There was more to fight for. And that Xerath would not forget this defeat. This isn't over, she muttered, eyes narrowing as she stared out at the wreckage. Not by a long shot. The aftermath of the battle was eerie. The once dominant Xerath fleet had been reduced to a smoldering wreckage. The Liberty's fury limped back from the heart of the chaos, its engines sputtering and its hull scarred with the marks of combat. The crew was exhausted, their faces drawn, but there was a sense of something more. Something monumental had just occurred. Captain Marshall stood on the bridge, staring out into the vast emptiness where the Xerath fleet had once reigned. The space was now littered with debris and the remains of the once proud hunter ships. The victory was theirs, but the cost had been steep. Status report, Lieutenant, Marshall said, her voice steady but fatigued. Lieutenant Turner glanced up from his console, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. Shields are down to 15%, Captain. Weapons are offline for the moment, but we've secured the core systems. We're alive. Barely. Marshall nodded. She had known the Liberty's fury had been pushed to its limits, but hearing it confirmed still weighed heavily on her. The ship was a wreck, but it had survived. More importantly, it had sent a message that would reverberate throughout the galaxy. "We've done it," Lieutenant Carter said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We stopped them." Marshall didn't answer immediately. She couldn't afford to let the victory cloud her judgment. The war was not over, and that Xerath were not the only threat humanity would face. What had happened in the past few days was only the beginning. "Not yet," Marshall replied softly, but her eyes were filled with a quiet determination. "This is just the start." At that moment, the communication console beeped, breaking the heavy silence. Voss quickly activated the transmission. "Captain, we've received a signal from the human command station in the Orion sector." Marshall's heart quickened. She knew what this meant. Their victory wasn't just important for the Liberty's fury and its crew. It was the turning point of the entire war. Humanity's struggle against the Xerath had taken a dark turn when the invaders began their relentless conquest. But now humanity had proven they could fight back. "Put it through," Marshall ordered. The screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face. General Samuel Hayes, the head of the human forces stationed in the Orion sector, appeared on screen. His expression was somber, but filled with a sense of pride. "Captain Marshall," he said, his voice carrying weight, "you've done the impossible. You've struck a crippling blow to the Xerath." Marshall swallowed hard. "We've survived. But the war is far from over, General. We need reinforcements, and we need them now." General Hayes nodded grimly. "You've earned more than that, Captain. This victory will galvanize every human fleet in the galaxy. We're already seeing movements on the outer colonies. They're ready to fight. The Xerath are retreating, but we've just entered a new phase of the war." Marshall's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The Xerath are regrouping," Hayes continued, "but they are not the only threat. New intelligence indicates that the Xerath's allies are beginning to move. We suspect other factions, ones we've never encountered before, are preparing to join the conflict. We can't afford to rest on our laurels." Marshall took a deep breath. The weight of the responsibility was suffocating, but she wasn't about to back down. "Understood, General. We'll be ready. Humanity's fight is just beginning." As the transmission ended, Marshall turned to her crew, who were all watching her intently. She knew they were tired. They had been through hell, and many of them had lost friends and comrades in this war. But this victory, this moment, belonged to them. "This battle was won," Marshall said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "But the war is far from over. We've proven we can stand up to them. Now we prove that humanity will never back down. We will fight until the galaxy belongs to us." The crew erupted into quiet cheers, but beneath it all, there was a shared understanding. This wasn't a time for celebration. There were still wars to be fought, battles to be won. And this victory, this first step, would mark the beginning of a new era for humanity. An era of strength, an era of unity, and above all, an era of defiance.